you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Well, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
So one of the hottest topics, I guess, this year at the state and to some extent nationally, and certainly to cities in California and counties, is the new Initiative 64 that was passed by the voters. And that allows recreational and adult use marijuana, right? Use.
Yeah.
So from that point, what has the city been doing since then? I know there was a Senate bill that had some specific conditions and addressed some of the issues that were in the initiative. And then cities are allowed to proceed with some regulatory findings and regulations on their own, right?
Right. So the city of Salinas was actually a little bit ahead of the game because as early as January of 2016, we had already created local ordinances around the medical use of marijuana and cannabis. So when Proposition 64 was passed in November of 2016, what we needed to start looking at was how do we amend our codes and build on what we already had in order to establish our own regulations. And yes, in June of 2017 is when the state passed the SB 94, which regulates medicinal and adult use of cannabis starting on January 1st. So what we've been doing as a city is looking at our regulations, and we've finished making the modifications that'll be necessary so that when January 1st comes, we should be ready to have both medicinal and adult use recreational cannabis being sold and distributed and manufactured and grown within the city of Salinas boundaries.
Right. So when the city commercialized a number of business sectors for cannabis, there were approximately, what, 6 types of businesses that in the commercial area?
Right. So the 6 types are essentially cultivation, which is growing, manufacturing, which is processing oil infusion or extracting the oil, dispensaries, which are places where you can go and buy cannabis or cannabis products, delivery, which is having those products delivered to your house, distribution, which is basically wholesale logistics and transport of the cannabis and cannabis product, and testing facilities, which are essentially laboratories where the cannabis is tested for molds and pesticides and potency and, just overall quality.
Right. And so you had a round of competitive proposals, right?
Correct, yeah.
And then how many were permitted, actually, out of that initial round?
So in that first round, we had 25 applications, and we issued 9 permits, 3 for cultivation, 3 for manufacturing, and 3 dispensary permits.
And where are those businesses now? Are they still doing more due diligence? Are they actually operating a business now, or are they still in the sort of the planning design stage of implementing the permits?
Yeah, one of the catches is that just because you've gotten the cannabis permit doesn't mean you've gotten all your land use and building permits also.
Right.
So we have one company that's been operating as a manufacturer, and the other ones are in various stages. Some of them just need to do a tenant improvement. Others we're proposing to construct an entire new building. So some of them should be up and running relatively soon, and others it may be a little while still.
Mm-hmm. So for next year, we might see what? Most of those 9 in some type of stage of operation.
I would expect so. Their permits give them 1 year to get their operations up and running, right, with a potential 3-month extension. So if they're not going to meet that timeline, we need you to kind of figure something out there.
Right. So those are up and approved. Now they're just looking to sort of execute and implement their business plans. And then the city council, I understand, authorized additional commercial permits.
Right. So the original ordinance only allowed for 3 each of manufacturing, cultivation, dispensaries, and deliveries. So the council has now amended that so that it's 5 cultivation, 5 manufacturing, 5 dispensaries. Deliveries are still at 3, and they also added in 5 distribution and an unlimited number of testing facilities. And I should note that we have also approved a testing facility permit as well.
Okay. So you're expecting in that category that's sort of a unique area because it's really not a product mix. There's either distributing or selling or dispensing.
Yeah, testing facilities just use very small amounts as samples. They're not dealing with a lot of cash. And it's a laboratory, so it's not making a lot of noise or anything like that. It's a very non-impactful type of operation. And so for that reason, those permits are a little bit easier to get than the other ones where there are more potential impacts.
Right. So you're in the process of reviewing those additional applications now.
Correct.
So what's the general timeline for final approval for those permits?
Those should be approved by mid-December. So, you know, by the time this actually airs, I would expect that all of those permits have been announced and approved. So we're looking at 13 applications right now, and we're doing those interviews, and we'll be announcing shortly. I would expect probably the week of December 11th, we'll be announcing the new permits that are going to be issued.
So one of the critical, I think, conditions is the location of these facilities in relationship to very public places like schools and their alcohol outlets, etc. So can you kind of briefly describe what those conditions are for any one of the 6, or maybe they're different for the 6 different types of businesses?
It's a little bit different for a dispensary, but just broadly. So just a little bit of background. The state requires a 600-foot buffer around schools, daycare centers, and youth centers. We've actually gone further in that we require a 1,000-foot buffer, and we have additional uses. So parks we've included, for example. So we actually have very strict rules when it comes to the distance from a cannabis business to a sensitive use.
Okay.
Now, sometimes you can have a sensitive use that isn't really going to be an issue with a particular business. So in the first round of permits, one thing that came up was we had a cultivation facility that was near a brewery, which that's not like locating a dispensary next to a bar.
Right.
It's very different operation. You really have 2 manufacturing operations. So in that case, the Planning Commission decided that there wasn't actually an impact there and made an exception. We've made it easier in the code now for the selection committee to grant those exceptions unless it's a dispensary or if the sensitive use is a school, park, or daycare center. And in that case, the selection committee doesn't have the ability to just make an exception.
So what happens then? Does it go to another body?
It gets denied, and
Okay.
then it can be appealed to the Planning Commission,
All right.
and then it can be appealed to City Council from Planning Commission if necessary by the applicant. So far, we've had that happen once in the last round.
Right. So if there is a maximum of 24, people will always ask this question because the City Council has authorized a certain level of taxation on these different types of commercial businesses. So maybe you can just briefly describe, what the tax level or tax rates might be for the different kinds of commercial
Right.
activity.
Right, so just kind of starting off, just looking at the city taxes, for cultivation, it's a $15 per square foot of grow area. And that would be going up to $25 per square foot in about 3 years, I believe. And that's for canopy space. So if you had a multi-level canopy, you would count the square foot from each canopy.
Wow.
And then in manufacturing and dispensaries as well, and delivery, it's 5% of gross receipts, going up to 10% in about 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, how will the city keep track of those gross receipts?
Well, we'll be auditing the businesses,
Okay.
and all the businesses are required by both our laws and by state law to have track and trace programs in place. And the state regulations came out about 2 weeks ago, and they specify in detail all the record keeping that needs to happen and what they need to be tracking and who's supposed to be tracking what, and it's very specific. So it's actually a very highly regulated industry.
So, with those different types of taxes, has there been a clear estimate or projection on total revenue from this cannabis industry for the city of Salinas? Or is that just too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell. I mean, people have thrown numbers out there, but I haven't seen one yet that I would point to and say, okay, I'm convinced that this individual is right. It's a lot of educated guessing.
Right.
I would put out an educated guess that the city would be looking at revenues somewhere in the 7-figure range, but that's just my educated guess at this point.
Right.
Because what we really need to see is what the demand for the legal products are, because the illegal market isn't just vanishing. So it will depend on customer preference, the price differentials, the product differentials, and also government enforcement action on the illegal market. And all of that's going to play a role in how much people are purchasing from the legal market.
Right.
And of course, the more business the legal market has, the higher the tax revenues will be.
Yeah. So is there some cooperative agreement between cities in, for example, Monterey County and the county itself in terms of, the enforcement or other considerations like maybe similar tax rates or, applications for permits? Is there a lot of difference between cities and the county?
There is a lot of difference. So some areas have chosen to ban it entirely. Some of them have chosen to open it up completely, and some are taking, I'll say a more conservative route, but they're not banning it. So the County of Monterey, for example, hasn't put any limits on the number of businesses, though they have put restrictions into, where you can do it. That sort of creates a de facto limitation, although not an actual numerical limitation. But some cities, such as Carmel and Pacific Grove, have chosen just to ban it entirely. And some cities, like Santa Cruz and Salinas, have chosen to allow these with limitations, either on the number of businesses or on what the businesses can do. So it's really quite a micmash, and a lot of it has been determined just in the last couple of months. So there's been a lot of question marks as to what the various jurisdictions are going to be doing.
Right.
And so that's really precluded the ability to create any agreements like you were discussing for coordination, because people weren't sure what they were going to be doing. So
Right.
until you do that, and does the community want it? And
Yeah.
if the community doesn't want it, then that's going to you're going to walk towards an agreement with a different mindset than if they do. So, but something like that, especially I think on the enforcement side, would make sense. But this is a learning experience for everyone, and I think a lot of people are kind of interested to see what happens when January 1st rolls around and
Right.
this becomes legal and you can grow it in your home, and it's
Right.
going to be a new world.
So now we switch to the adult use, and recreational use. So how does that compare and with what the city's doing with commercial? There was an ordinance that set forth some regulatory aspects and conditions, but since this was a voter-approved initiative, it might we can't go too far in terms of what the state is going to allow or the citizens' initiative allowed, right?
Right. So I think one of the most interesting things about Prop 64 and what it allowed is the personal grow. and people are allowed to grow that in their homes now, up to 6 plants. And it doesn't matter if it's for medicinal or recreational use, it's just, you can just grow the plants now. And so that's going to be a big change, and we have to adapt to that. What we do have to look at is, where we can regulate what we want to be doing, so we don't allow growing cannabis outdoors at a residence, for example.
Right.
And the reason for that is that cannabis plants can have an odor, and perhaps that's fine if one person does it, but what happens when 7 people on a block all start doing it? And if that block is right next to a school, then you certainly don't want those odors coming into a playground where kids are playing. It's just parents are going to get upset, the schools are going to get upset. Without knowing what the impacts of this are going to be, we thought it was preferable just to keep it, indoors, which the state has said is permitted. For the commercial businesses, generally we looked at our regulations for medicinal businesses, and they're pretty strict. I mean, it's very clear as to what the requirements are. The main differences with adult use is, first of all, for testing labs, cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, there is no difference. It doesn't matter if you're making a product for medicinal use or adult use, you're still making a product, as far as the community impact goes, I mean.
Right.
So it's really the dispensaries and delivery businesses that we have to look at. And the big differences are medicinal doesn't have sales tax, so there's a little bit of a taxation collection issue there. And recreational does not require an ID card. You just have to have proof of age, that you're 21 or older. Well, that's not that big of a difference. We will see what if there's differences in the clientele, but within our city, the folks who are selling adult use will be the same folks that are selling the medicinal. We're not going to have, over here you buy medicinal and over here you buy adult use. They're all going to be permitted to sell both. So for that reason, I think that you're really looking at a very similar customer base. But, like I said, this is a learning experience. So we're going to be keeping an eye on this pretty closely next year.
Right.
And if there's any issues, we're going to move to deal with them.
Right. So basically, the city's not requiring at this time a permit for homegrown.
Nope.
It's allowable up to 6 plants, as long as it's indoors. And the commercial industry can move into that part of the business, the adult use, right? And then, so that will all sort of take place in the year 2018, next year, right?
Yeah, I think first half of the year in particular will be
Right.
a time of transition as everyone kind of figures out what's going on.
Right. So when do you report back to the council in terms of the, the issues that are either happening or issues that don't need to be addressed? If, after a 6-month or 8-month or 9-month period, do you have to provide, some record of and report back to the council on what's going on with the industry and the permits?
Yeah, and I believe, if I recall correctly, it's every 6 months, with the first report being in February of next year. So by February, we should have all the permits issued that we're going to issue for the time being. There may be a few, spots
Right.
left over that we might do something with, but there will not be a lot of them, I don't believe. So we're supposed to give them a report as to where everything is at, but I think the really interesting one will be the one following that first one, because by then I think we're really going to have 6 or 7 months of operations under our belt, and that's where we're going to be able to kind of see what is the actual impact of this.
So there are a couple of what I call pull-push issues in tension. One is sort of that general category of cannabis versus the more traditional agricultural experience. And Salinas Valley is well known for its fresh crop. So what's the kind of reception and perspective, I guess, of traditional ag as you know it, versus and as they look at this new grow, if you will, a product called cannabis. Is that affecting it, the ag sector?
It has the potential to. The cannabis industry has the ability to pay higher wages than the agricultural industry may be able to supply. So that could have an impact on labor. The county and the city, and I think every jurisdiction has banned outdoor grow. I believe some jurisdictions allow outdoor grow at your house, but that's not like, you know, a field of cannabis. So that will, for the time being at least, prevent the cannabis industry from actually taking the land. But if that ever were to happen, then certainly that would be a challenge. And I think that the agricultural community is, you know, is growing cannabis agriculture? I get different answers to that question from different people. Some people say, well, yes, this is agriculture. Others say, no, that's not agriculture. So does it have a potential for impact? Yeah, it does. How big of an impact?
Right.
One of the many things we don't know.
Not yet, anyway.
Not yet. We, you know, in a year,
Yeah.
well, we will know a lot more about how this is going to be
Right.
operating.
So another tension is sort of the federal outlook and their construct, if you will, and structure for how they deal with cannabis as a type of drug that is legal versus the state of California, where it's now legal, and including adult use will be legal. Then you have states like that have been even earlier than California, like Colorado and Washington. So how, if we heard anything from the federal folks in terms of, you know, any major issues with the state moving into this area?
Well, the federal government has made it clear that as far as they're concerned, cannabis and marijuana are a Schedule I drug and it's illegal.
Yeah.
That being said, are they going to enforce their laws? And, you know, again, we don't know what they're going to do. They may choose to do so, they may not. Thus far, we have not seen a lot of federal action or enforcement of marijuana or cannabis grows. The exception being is if there's some tie to organized crime or gangs, or if it's on federal lands, you know, people growing out in the forest, they'll react to that. But the DEA thus far has not moved or taken action when you find a small indoor grow in an urban area. It's just, I guess, not a priority to them.
Right.
But that could change,
Right.
essentially, whenever they decide they want to do something different. I believe personally that medicinal is probably pretty safe. There's 38 states that have some form of medicinal,
Okay.
you know, legality on the books. So I don't think they're going to try to take on 38 states, but only 7 of them have legalized recreational. So I think that is a bit more vulnerable. But, you know, I mean, it is what it is. It's no one expects that we're going to see the legalization of this at the federal level in the immediate future.
Right.
At least not until, you know, the next administration. So we'll just kind of keep, you know, our eyes on that. Certainly, you know, we're not going to hinder federal authorities from enforcing their rules, but I think that, you know, we'll be focused more on enforcing our rules.
Okay, so the last sort of major push-pull looks to be like the commercial and the adult use. Will the adult use recreational have an impact on that demand for some of the you know, commercial business that will be supplied by the commercial businesses? So if you can grow your own, do you need to go to the corner dispensary, for example? If you can grow your own, maybe you don't have that same kind of demand to go, generally speaking, the public doesn't, who wants to use medicinal purposes, let's say, doesn't need to go to the dispensary with a note from the doctor saying, I need to have this, you know, kind of cannabis, you know, solution.
Right. That's something else we're not really sure about. We don't know. We'll have to find out. I think that as far as the consumption of the raw cannabis, so, you know, something that you would smoke, growing it at home is definitely going to be competing against that, because, you know, when you're growing it yourself, you do know what's going into it.
Right.
Buying it on the illegal market, you're still not going to know where it's been. Was there mold? Was there pesticides used on it? The other side of this whole thing, though, is the manufactured products. You know, infused foods, the extracted oils,
Right.
tinctures. There's gum. I mean, there's lots of different products out there that it's not easy just to make them in your garage. And if you do, it's probably not going to be as good.
Right.
Because they're starting to come out with some pretty nice, I mean, I don't know, I haven't tried it, but I hear good things.
Right.
So I think that the manufactured products in particular will be hard to find outside of the legal market. But the plants themselves, that is a thought. And 6 plants, I mean, a cannabis plant can get pretty big.
Yeah.
You can get more than you'll need in a year, hopefully.
Right.
You know, and just from those 6 plants. I would expect that a person growing plants would probably be sharing with their friends, which they are legally allowed to do as long as they don't get paid for it.
Right. Any other advice for our citizens about the cannabis new industry in the city of our Salinas?
I would say keep an open mind.
Yeah.
If you have any issues, feel free to call the city and let us know, and we'll try to deal with any problems that are arising. But also, this is the law that the voters of California have chosen to pass, and you know, at some level, there's going to be a level of adjustment for
Right.
everybody.
Well, it looks like it, for at least the short term, it's going to be here to stay, and there'll be more information and I'm sure adjustments in the marketplace for how the commercial sector is working. But it won't surprise many of us that many people will be using it as recreational, for recreational purposes.
I expect that many of them already are. Now they'll just be doing it more openly.
Right. It's legal. It'll be legal.
It's legal.
Right. Well, thank you, Andy, for coming on the show again. We
You're welcome.
appreciate
It's a
it.
pleasure.
All right.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.